Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Tungate, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy at World Business Chicago. Thank you for joining this month's Discover Our Sister Cities conversation. And it's so great to see that in the audience, we have many of our volunteer committee members, many of our German partners, as well as some new guests. For those of you who are new, Discover is a monthly series that showcases unique topics from around Chicago's 29 international sister cities. And I'm thrilled that today, joining us from Hamburg, Germany, is cultural historian Tomas Kaiser, who will explain how Reeperbahn, Hamburg's red light district, has evolved into one of Germany's and Europe's most popular and lively cultural destinations. And in fact, the upcoming Reeperbahn Festival is the biggest club festival in Europe and the largest European platform for pop culture in the music industry. This year, the US Consulate in Hamburg is featuring the Sister Cities Connection at the festival with a Chicago playground with performances by Chicago musician Neil Francis and the band Air Credits. And as part of the festival, they're also organizing a gaming esports commerce competition between gamers in Chicago and in Hamburg that will be epic, and I can't wait to see it. Hamburg is one of our strongest sister city relationships, and it has been very active throughout the pandemic, for which I'm very grateful for. And this activity is driven in large part by our wonderful partners in the city of Hamburg, who are joining us here today, and our volunteers here in Chicago. I'd like to thank Consul General Mossinger, the German Consul General in Chicago, and Consul General Atkins, who's the US Consul General in Hamburg, for both of your amazing support of the Sister Cities program. And acknowledge the co-chairs of the Hamburg Committee, Christoph Lechtenfeld and Charlene Sobey. Thank you both for the work that you do to promote the relationship between Chicago and Hamburg, and for your work putting together today's program. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Charlene. Charlene?
Thank you, Adrienne. Welcome, everyone. When I was a graduate student in Germany many years ago, I won't say how many, I spent part of one spring break visiting a friend in Hamburg. One evening, he asked me if I'd like to go to the Reeperbahn. The question was partly a joke and partly a dare, because in those days, no respectable person, especially a young woman, would go to the Reeperbahn, particularly not at night. Well, how times have changed. Now the Reeperbahn and the surrounding St. Pauli district is the place to go in Hamburg if you want to have a nice dinner, go to a concert, or see a musical. What happened? Here to tell us the story is Tomas Kaiser. Tomas is a Hamburg native, a freelance tour guide, and a cultural historian. In fact, he is Dr. Tomas Kaiser. He has a PhD in cultural studies. Tomas conducts walking and bicycle tours for individuals and groups on all aspects of Hamburg architecture, history, and culture. One of the people who's had the privilege of a private tour from Tomas is Rick Steves. We're very happy to have Tomas with us today. I'd also like to thank our friends at Hamburg Marketing for making his visit possible. Incidentally, if you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the chat box and we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. Without further ado, welcome virtually to Chicago, Dr. Tomas Kaiser. Now, please take us to the Reeperbahn.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and for me it's really a pleasure to give some information about all the changes happened in St. Pauli in the Reeperbahn district in the last 20 or 30 years, or you could say over all the centuries. I want to introduce Hamburg. Maybe some of you don't know, Hamburg is the biggest city in the European Union, not being a capital, and was never a residence. So if you want to see a castle, don't come to Hamburg. Hamburg didn't need a castle. What Hamburg got is this almost a civil castle for the government and the parliament. It's the second biggest city with 1.9 million inhabitants, or the second smallest state, and has two rivers, one for making money, St. Pauli is on that river, and a second one where all the money flew in the last centuries, here again at the town hall. So it's the Alster. It was the river where Hamburg spent all the money on the last centuries, and Hamburg was over centuries one of the richest cities in Germany, and still today one of the very rich cities in Europe. The newest landmark of Hamburg is a concert hall on that river, to where Hamburg is now looking on since a couple of years, because the waterfront changed a lot. On this map, you see old Hamburg, and Hamburg had a fortification that sheltered Hamburg against the 30 Years' War. But by the war, Hamburg was neutral and was kind of a bank of the war, became the richest city in the German Empire in those days. And Reeperbahn is here, outside of Hamburg. And interesting is to understand how St. Pauli could get such a liberal atmosphere. At the end, Reeperbahn was another country. Which country? Denmark. And it was Altena. Altena today is a borough of Hamburg, but used to be the second biggest Danish town after Copenhagen. And both cities, one step back, important to know as well that Hamburg burned down in the 1840s, and a special role for St. Pauli was then to take all the ships that Hamburg didn't want, because Hamburg burned down and was afraid of fire, and all the sailing ships were allowed to sail to Hamburg, but not the steamships. They had to stay outside of the city in St. Pauli. So St. Pauli got this role already then in time of the Industrial Revolution. And St. Pauli today, here is still to see, today you see the park, the former fortification, and St. Pauli today is quite small. Hamburg, and now the borough of Altena, and Reeperbahn here. Important other streets in St. Pauli became here Große Freiheit, Great Freedom. Used to be a street of Danish Altena, and Herbertstraße here, and Davidstraße. And very important other places in St. Pauli is this field for fun fairs, and as well the Reeperbahn Festival. And here is, well, then to say later on, the bunker, a big flag bunker of World War II, and the football stadium. St. Pauli had always a hard history, and a bird was burned down 200 years ago when the Napoleon troops occupied Hamburg. They want to say open field when the enemies were approaching to Hamburg. So St. Pauli was completely destroyed. And it was always locked out of Hamburg. Hamburg had gates. It was a milling gate, and the locks were when the sun set, the locks were locked. So St. Pauli could become an entertainment district when Hamburg finally not closed the gates anymore in the evening. It was in the 1860s. And this special fountain, one of the most beautiful one in Hamburg, is symbolizing the competition between the two neighbor towns. They fight about the fish. And a very important market in Germany is the St. Pauli fish market every Sunday morning. And in the former fish auction hall are there live acts, cover bands playing every Sunday morning between, maybe 8 o'clock and noon. So it's as well today a place of music. And the former Danish Altena had freedom of belief. And this is here what you can see in the Baroque style, the oldest Catholic church in Northern Europe after the Reformation. And it's hard to believe that next door began the career of the Beatles and the Star Club. And when the Star Club went bankrupt, it became the first sex show, the first sex theater in Germany, the time of flower power, where the first sex act was shown on stage in the 1970s and the 1980s. And St. Pauli has so many different faces, and here the place where in former times the first steamships were allowed to call the port of Hamburg. Later on, it was as well the place for many people immigrating, leaving the old world, immigrating to America. And it's as well a very important junction for the dockers, for the workers, when they cross the Elbe, because so many thousand people lived in Hamburg and worked in the harbor that became the biggest harbor in Europe around 1900, that Hamburg constructed the first underwater tunnel on the continent. And when the dockers came back from work, or when they work and they had a little pause, they had a special snack, and it was Rundstück warm. And the immigrants learned that, or it was offered as well on the way to America, and they called that hamburger. But it looks a little bit different, and it's not beef, it's a little bit cheaper, because, yeah, it was a docker snack. And prostitution was always offered, the oldest serve in the world, on the waterfront, in old times, in old days. And it was as well quite risky for immigrating girls to come to Hamburg. So you see here a kind of ad that was a warning, urgent warning to immigrating girls. No, please don't strand in the prostitution in St. Pauli on the waterfront on the way to America. And as well, during the Nazi time, prostitution, even it was not allowed in Germany for all the years, it was allowed and accepted and tolerated in Hamburg and Bremen. Why? It was the gateway to the world and was a place for the seafarers. But the Nazis asked for a kind of invisibility, so it was behind this blockade, and this was just on still today existing since the Nazi times, that is open just for men over 18 years. And this street where the prostitution was tolerated, it became now these days, more or less in the last 20 or 30 years, the high-end prostitution, because St. Pauli now is a place of a lot of designer hotels, and as well businessmen. In former times it was not possible to stay overnight in St. Pauli, but now it is. And this is now almost a folklore postcard, because the prostitution has changed worldwide, as well the red light districts worldwide change. Why? You have today the internet, you have Tinder, you have Grindr, and no seafarers anymore. Seafarers, yes, but today container ships, and the people don't have not so much income to spend it in red light districts in Europe. And today you have a high demand in that neighborhood where the truck drivers or forwarders are. So the red light district of Hamburg is not that anymore that it was. In the times after the war, before the war, it became, as you already heard a couple of times, a very creative and a very entertaining district. This shows a picture of the Great Liberty, where you have seen already the Catholic Church. The last brothel closed years ago, and the answer of the manager of the last brothel was, "Why are you closing your business?" Yeah, the men don't come anymore. The clients keep away. They're afraid meeting the kids on the street. But this map is showing St. Pauli for men. This is a map for men in the 1970s. Reeperbahn here, and Great Freedom here, and Herbertstraße there, here. You saw how many different etablissements or brothels or sex shows were possible to see in those days. What is still existing in Germany, beside of the bureaucracy, is bureaucracy as well for prostitution. And one street prostitution obviously is still offered in Davidstraße, but just on the right sidewalk, not on the left sidewalk. There's a police station, and prostitution is allowed just on from 8 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. But already 30 years ago, there began, I think, worldwide a movement of so-called sex workers. They want to say that there are so many problems with people or girls from East Europe urged to become prostitutes, and they began to fight for the rights for the sex workers, especially in Hamburg. And she became famous in Germany. The prostitute Domenica worked a lot after her first career as a prostitute, then as a social worker, and with her, in Hamburg, many demonstrations happened, and at the end they got as well the acceptance as a kind of labor forces, and so they have to pay taxes, and they got more rights. And since 15 years in Germany, prostitution is legal, but I told you already, the prostitution is gone. There were times where more or less 3,500 prostitutes maybe in St. Pauli, more or less now, and now maybe 300. And the Great Freedom or Reeperbahn weekends are packed with people. Statistics saying more than 30 million people come in a year to Reeperbahn. So for the people in Hamburg, Reeperbahn sometimes is not so attractive like the side streets. On the Great Freedom now, there's Star in Hamburg, and she is very popular in whole Germany. Is this drag queen. She became successful in a competition in Miami, 1999, and still working as a drag queen. She has already some bars and as well some show theaters, and quite hip. In the last years when she opened, I think she got the idea in London, is the porn karaoke bar. So you see there vintage porn movies from the 60s and 70s, and the audience can groan and moan to this movie seen on screen. And across the tiny street is a special address just for women, not for men, because the men is stripping on stage. So these addresses are quite popular for the end of bachelor parties. And close to Reeperbahn is this former horse barn, became a shelter room during World War II, and then a jazz club. Hamburg is, in Germany, a very important place for jazz singers. Al Jarreau started a career in Hamburg, and Ella Fitzgerald Armstrong played here. Nowadays we have a renaissance of microbreweries. It's a microbrewery, Überquell. Another good place for having drinks is, because St. Pauli has more than 400 different addresses, as well as very good cocktail bars, and just got the award being the best cocktail bar in Germany, the Chuck Club. Or you have new taller buildings. This is Heaven's Nest, for example, a rooftop bar, and here in the back you see then the Elbe River and the Elbphilharmonie again. And another building got an award for being great architecture, interior design, and the concept having a bar and as a part hotel and a restaurant. It's East. About music is a lot to say about St. Pauli, not just pop music or rock music, as well classic music. Here you see on the screen the former concert house Ludwig, where as well Johannes Brahms' father played, or Johannes Brahms himself, and later as well then Gustav Mahler. Across the street there were more theaters. So you had always two different faces of St. Pauli. You had the prostitution in one part of the Reeperbahn, but the second Reeperbahn was always open for families visiting the concerts. So a lot of contrasts. But after we began the war, it was important for the Allies to destroy Hamburg. Hamburg was important for Hitler, and as well a big part of St. Pauli has been destroyed, especially then the theaters and the concert hall. And very close to Reeperbahn, it's one of the biggest bunker ever constructed in Germany, coming after the war, when Hamburg became part of the British zone, a media bunker and the first German radio station, because from that building it became a media center and as well a very creative little spot in northern St. Pauli, where today is a concert hall as well a music academy, internet radio, agencies, the whole neighborhood, because Hamburg became after the war the publishing or the media capital, because just in Hamburg the journalists could work after the war. And now on top they're constructing an artist hotel and little studios and workshops for artists. And next to that building is a football stadium. And St. Pauli is not a classical football team. It's a very, very tolerated and liberal one. It was the first football team or soccer team in Germany where a president is gay and it is very open, and they are supporting people with lower income. They have a kindergarten in the stadium or in one of the corners. And they are organizing once a year a big art exhibition, a big art show. It's one of the very important galleries now in Hamburg. And back to music, as you know, the Beatles began their career in 1960 on stage of the Stage Club and nowhere else. They gave so many concerts like in Hamburg in the 1960s, in the early 1960s. And now on the tracks of the Beatles is giving tours Stephanie Hempel, and she is playing on her ukulele in front of a kind of tombstone reminding to the former Star Club. And maybe you can read all the names of stars which gave the concerts, including Ray Charles. And after the Stage Club went bankrupt at the end of the 1960s, then began really bad time in this neighborhood. It was as well for the people in Hamburg, neighborhood of sex and crime, it was a no-go area. And nobody would have think about an excess of a new kind of entertainment that was offered already in London or in New York as well, the Cats musical. And it ran then, surprise, surprise, then 15 years. And the shadow of Cats began the comeback of St. Pauli as entertainment district. And across the river of St. Pauli, there's now since 20 years Lion King, and Hamburg became this center for the German shows. So London or New York, London and Hamburg are the leading cities in the world for musicals. And because St. Pauli produced so many shows, the leading shipping or cruise line in Germany, AIDA, they began as well to build a first academy and producing now their own shows on their ships, on the cruise ships, like this, for example, in front of the Elbphilharmonie. And now, since 15 years, with the help of the Reeperbahn Festival, it's possible to say that in the there's a kind of little battle between Hamburg and Berlin. Both cities are very creative in Germany, and both are more or less in the north. In between are 200 miles. And some years Berlin is very hip, then Hamburg again. The world loves Berlin, but the Germans, they love Hamburg. And in the last years, Hamburg becoming more and more younger city. And now Hamburg is the youngest state in Germany. And it has to do with St. Pauli, with the Reeperbahn Festival. And the Reeperbahn Festival is almost now a brand of Hamburg, because this festival is taking place in a smaller version, much smaller version, as well in New York or in Beijing and other countries. So it's almost now a product of Hamburg. How it could happen, nowhere else in Germany, on such a small neighborhood, 70 music clubs and 400 music acts. And just in 4 days, you can walk from one club to the next club. And especially then this year, as it was said, it used as a launch pad, because it could be that next year the United States are the partner country for this festival that's going to take place every year in September. And this is here now, Reeperbahn with the dancing tower you have seen already here, the rooftop terrace, and here there's a clubhouse where underneath one roof are 7 music clubs. The next one is here. And the logo of the Reeperbahn Festival, now since 15 years existing. And here on this movie, you see both the new Hamburg on the Elbe with the Elbphilharmonie, and here the new crown of Reeperbahn, the Reeperbahn district, and St. Pauli, and here then the old Elb tunnel. And now I would like to thank you very much that I could give you then some new features maybe, or some new information about St. Pauli. And I would like to invite you now to, if you have some questions, and I hope I can give then the answer to, let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for that great presentation and telling us more about St. Pauli and Reeperbahn. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type those into the chat. And before I forget, I'm Kairi. I'm a program manager with the Chicago Sister Cities International Initiative. And we do have a question from Katie. And her question is, what are the capacity of the venues? What are the number of venues? And are the venues owned by individuals or owned by multinationals? For example, Live Nation or AEG?
Yeah, it's private. They're small, very small venues sometimes, but it's interesting. It's becoming such an accepted and event that as well the churches in the neighborhood are joining. So there are as well great singer-songwriter acts in stages in churches, as well as St. Michael Church. St. Michael Church on the old landmark of Hamburg has 2,500 seats, or St. Pauli Church has maybe 300, but there are as well small theaters where you have just maybe 100. So it depends on how famous is a singer that the manager decide, okay, he can go on stage of a big venue or a smaller venue. So it's very, very different, the venues. I read here another question. St. Pauli Girl Beer. That is funny because St. Pauli Girl beer is unknown in Germany. Nobody knows St. Pauli Girl beer. It was brewed, and maybe it's still brewed. It's still existing in the States. It was brewed in Bremen. And Bremen is a competitor to Hamburg. They have a similar history. It's not that far away from Hamburg. And they're brewing the beer, but it was given them the license because maybe one day it was brewed in St. Pauli, but it was not popular. And they sold the brand to Bremen, but just for the export. So nobody knows St. Pauli Girl beer. So I think maybe a little disappointing information. Beg your pardon.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for clarifying that. And does anyone else have any other questions from the audience that they'll like Thomas to answer? And I'm just waiting, Thomas, giving them a little bit more time. And I think Charlene might have a question for us.
I have a couple of questions or comments. Thomas, I know that, as I indicated, you do give tours of Hamburg. Could you please share with us your website so that if anyone does visit Hamburg in the near future, they can arrange to have to join you on a tour?
Oh, thank you that you're asking that. It's Thomas without an H. My father didn't like any H as a name, so Thomas without H. My father's calling Günther, my brother Thorsten. So Thomas without H. Mine is Kaiser, like emperor, Kaiser Hamburg.
So Thomas hyphen or punkt? Or just Thomas?
Line. Thomas and
hyphen or unterstrich or
Strich. Bindestrich. Thank you.
Okay, Thomas hyphen Kaiser. Yes.
Dot Hamburg.
Hamburg. Okay. So if you plan to visit Germany and go to Hamburg, make sure that you arrange for a tour with Tomas, because I guarantee you he can give you information about any topic related to the city.
Wonderful, and thank you, Charlene, for that. We have another follow-up question, Thomas, about the venues, and it's, how did the government support the venues during COVID? Or was there support from the government?
The art scene or the Germans?
For the venues,
the venues are, Germany is like the States, a federal republic, and it was dependent on the government. And Hamburg was very satisfied with the government, how they led Hamburg through this time. But for the music clubs, it was very hard. It's now since last weekend allowed again, after 1.5 years, to open the music clubs if the people are vaccinated or recovered. And it was not allowed before in Hamburg. Maybe it has to do with the fact that the Lord Mayor of Hamburg he worked in former times in a hospital. So he is a doctor of medicine and was a little bit more hesitating than maybe other states. But they got a lot of support, but they were not allowed to open their music club.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And just giving we have another question from Brett, and this is: has Germany imposed any new restrictions this week on travel by U.S. tourists?
As far as I read in the last week, there are more restrictions in the States than here. So the Europeans are not allowed to go to the US. But I'm not, now in Europe, it's almost easily to travel, maybe not in Norway. But Europe is a little bit more complicated than the States, and each country it's that small but has their own regulations. So before we go, I haven't been to other countries in the last almost 1.5 years, because in Denmark, sometimes in Hamburg, the incidence rates are higher, sometimes in Denmark, and then there's one country not allowing to cross the border. But still, it's not allowed for us to go abroad to the States. Neither the Americans can go to Hamburg. But I think it will almost now be the end of the pandemic, because even now the incidence rates is now higher or getting higher. There are a lot of vacancies in the hospital. So I think they think in the future there will still a little bit of incidence rates, but it's not affecting really the people, and they don't expect any new lockdown. And therefore, all the restaurants going to be open, as well the music clubs, more and more. And therefore, last year it was just more online Reeperbahn Festival, but this year will be a real festival again in 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Great, thank you. And we do have a couple more questions. One of them is Hamburg just St. Pauli red light district culture?
It's a very important question. Thank you very much for this question. For the Germans, as I said, Hamburg is a beautiful city, for many as well the most beautiful city, and it's a very elegant city. And St. Pauli is just one very small part of Hamburg. I think there will be many people in Hamburg that would never go to St. Pauli, because it's almost for them a very crazy neighborhood, because Hamburg's elegant neighborhood, it's a green neighborhood with a lot of it was the color white. It was very in fashion 160 years ago. Hamburg is sometimes quite British, so there are a lot of neighborhoods with a lot of British influence. And in that neighborhood, you wouldn't see any possibility to make a street art tour. But St. Pauli, with a lot of illustrators and e-game industry, this is a very creative note, as I said, and there are a lot of street art and street artists and street artist tours. I think Hamburg has a lot of contrast. 40% of the city is water, and Hamburg is developing the old waterfront to biggest development projects in Europe in the city. On one hand, you could say Hamburg is a green city, a lot of buildings, very beautiful. One part of Hamburg was destroyed, the other part not. And has an old big warehouse complex, the biggest warehouse complex in the world, that is now since 5 years listed by the UNESCO. You have different types of possibilities to make water sport, or to make a little cruise on the Alster lakes or through the harbor. So there are many different phases that Hamburg has, and St. Pauli is just a little one. And we didn't talk about cuisine or food. There's St. Pauli as well, a place for learn the green Michelin stars, because Hamburg has a lot of good restaurants. And no wonder that the new creative chefs are cooking in St. Pauli, because there's now as well in St. Pauli, in former times a neighborhood of dockers, of workers. Now St. Pauli is the best example for gentrification. That is a phenomenon, or sometimes about a problem that you have all over the world. And St. Pauli is now one of the most expensive places in Hamburg to live.
Well, thanks for sharing more about what Hamburg and St. Pauli have to offer. We have another question from David, and it says, does legalized prostitution seem to reduce overall crime levels, especially in the active neighborhoods?
It's a very important question, and I think they have to confess. At the end, the politicians and the police were disappointed. They thought legalizing the prostitution helped them, because nowadays it's possible when the prostitute is not getting the money to say to the client, "Oh, let's go to the police," and she knows that she's getting her money. But it didn't support the women, sometimes from East Europe or from Africa, which have been urged to work as a prostitute, because they don't know sometimes that it's legally to work as a prostitute, and that they could get support to get out of this business with the help of street workers or the police and officials. So, and they were thinking legalizing the prostitution would help them, but it's not really working, and it's still a problem.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Thomas. Another question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the age range? The people that visit St. Pauli, what age range would you usually say visit more?
I'm now in the mid-50s. I could be then, the father of most of the people are there. So they're around 18, 19, 20, very, very young. And Hamburg had, before Corona, now things changed, and it hopefully will be like it was before the pandemic. But Hamburg had never curfew, and the Beatles were shocked when they came from Great Britain that they play not until 11 p.m. but after midnight, because in Hamburg it was never curfew existing. It's for many people it was now this 1.5 year a new experience to have a kind of curfew, because the bars, restaurants had to close until last week at 11 o'clock. So they had to play the Beatles after midnight. In Hamburg, the people going out very, very late. So from Friday until Monday morning, you can go out, St. Pauli, to all the clubs. And they are very young, the people going out. But you have as well the theaters in St. Pauli. You have the musicals, the theaters. So it depends on which part of St. Pauli. It's such a unique spot of entertainment. And one part of St. Pauli, and the other part are all the agencies in the bunker you have seen. So I think there's such a neighborhood with so many different streets that nowhere else in Hamburg is existing.
Thank you. And I think somebody has, how much has the internet impacted St. Pauli? I know you've touched briefly on that, but if you could tell us a little bit more about just social media, how has that impacted tourism, or just how it's grown?
Hamburg, the internet is very important for St. Pauli, especially in the northern part of St. Pauli, where all the agencies are, and now as well the game industry that is now a big thing, and it's as well the reason that the Consulate General is thinking that with e-sport could be a possibility to get in contact with the people on the Reeperbahn Festival, because St. Pauli is as well one spot for the German e-gaming industry. And as I said, the new media is concentrated as well in Hamburg. Sometimes I'd like to describe the difference between Berlin and Hamburg, because those cities are very creative. If you're an artist, you have to go to Berlin. But if you want to work in the new media, in the big companies, for example, or in the startup scene, there's Hamburg a very good place, because in Hamburg is the industry, is money, is one of the rich cities. And there's as well as support for the new media. So Hamburg is a city for the startup companies in new media.
Thank you. And we have Dietrich, who shared a comment and says that, just for information, during the Reeperbahn Festival, they have you have a Chicago playground with live acts from Chicago organized by the U.S. Consulate General. So
that's very important. That was already said in the introduction. That's it's good to repeat. Thank you. But I think that this year they tried to have live acts from Chicago because of the situation is this year not possible, but it will be like a launch pad for the next year. They have the playground and a kind of circus tent on the Reeperbahn Festival, and it's a very good start to show how important is the relationship to have with Chicago, with the States, and Europe, and Hamburg and St. Pauli. Reeperbahn Festival.
Great. And as we're getting ready to wrap up, Thomas, from everything you've shared, what would you like us to take away as we are just from the presentation and from about Hamburg and St. Pauli and the Reeperbahn?
Pardon? I didn't.
Oh, what would you like us to take away? Just if you wanted to share anything else, we'll be wrapping up in the next 2 minutes. So any final comments that you would like to share with us?
It was exciting for me to show a little bit of, because when I here in Hamburg making a tour for Americans is different than for Germans, because for the Germans Reeperbahn has a completely different meaning, and for Hamburg the Reeperbahn was in former times a problem, and because Hamburg had outside of Germany different reputation than in Germany, and that was the reason why when Germany had to organize the soccer championship, the World Cup many years ago, they asked, let's host the American team, because when the American soccer team is in Hamburg, the Americans look to Hamburg and see that Hamburg is more than just port and no-go area. And that was nice to see when the journalists came, that they were really surprised that Hamburg is much, 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 much more than just Reeperbahn. That was a nice experience. And it was very nice to give this kind of presentation of the changes of that waterfront, and that Hamburg is more than the waterfront.
Well, thank you so much. We were delighted to learn more about it. And with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Christoph, who will be giving some concluding remarks. But thank you so much, Thomas, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Christoph, I think you're muted.
Okay.
Christoph, unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay, this is an interesting presentation. Lots of great questions and answers. I was born in Hamburg, grew up in Hamburg, went to school there. Today, I learned interesting facts I was not aware of. Featuring Chicago's sister cities, today was Hamburg, is a neat idea. Charlene Sobi and I thank the Chicago Sister City International Organization, Adrian Tongate and Ernan Montes Mathon for this effort. I like to thank Johannes Everke from Hamburg Marketing for his support, and Dietrich Stegert, our Chicago-Hamburg liaison, a good friend of mine, for his enthusiastic engagement to get this project going. Many thanks to the Zoom participants. I hope this presentation will be caught up and used by the public. A special thanks goes to Tomas Kaiser for his outstanding presentation. This program provided a good picture of Hamburg and the Reeperbahn and offered many, many reasons to visit Hamburg. Tomas Kaiser, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again. And here in Hamburg, the sun is setting, and next time I will look to have more light, because I see myself now in the picture, it's getting darker, beg your pardon. Thank you. Thank you.
I will join Christoph in thanking you, Dr. Kaiser, and thank you for sharing your evening with us and your expertise. This was a wonderful and insightful conversation. Definitely one of the most racy Discover Our Sister Cities that we've had. Germans love Hamburg, and Chicagoans do too. So I think that Sister Cities trip to Hamburg is in order once we're able to travel as a group again. I think we definitely need to put it on our list for group travel. So thank you for sharing with us. I'd also like to thank the team that put this together, particularly Charlene, Christoph, Dietrich, our friend in Hamburg, and Hamburg Marketing. We very much appreciate your support. The Sister Cities mission is driven by our volunteers. We're particularly grateful for them. They're citizen diplomats who care deeply about connecting Chicagoans with the rest of the world. If you're new to our program and are interested in joining us as a volunteer, we'll drop a link in the chat where you can learn more about how to do that. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. I hope that you can all join us next month as we'll explore our sister city of Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
You.